horse and a candy man. Like a freight train rolling, bringing truth bombs down the line. Promoting the Southland 1 week at a time. Promoting the Southland 1 week at a time. SCV Chat starts now.
Well, how about that intro music? That's something else.
That's a great song. I think I know who that was.
I think I do too. Well, I'm Adam Southern, Executive Director of the SCV, and before we get started, I think we should read our disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed on this broadcast are not those of the SCV, its GEC, nor any divisions, brigades, camps, or other subsidiaries. Welcome to SCV Chat. And I have with me tonight a man that I've come to know when I became Executive Director. He was on the GEC. He was our Chief of Staff, I believe. But he's done everything from the camp level up to division commander in Louisiana and has been on the General Executive Committee, as I said, Mr. Charles Lauret.
Thank you. Glad to be here, Adam. Good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you. It was good to see you a couple of weeks ago. We were both down in Biloxi for the Stephen D. Lee Institute. What a great weekend that was.
Yes, it was. Yeah, a lot of good speakers. Really enjoyed being there and seeing everybody.
As you can see from kind of our decor, Charles has got a lot more going on than I do, but I've got my Forever Lee Circle beads on. Hey, Fat Tuesday's tomorrow, isn't it?
That's right. We're deep in the Mardi Gras season down here in Louisiana, and tomorrow's the big day. So today they're partying as well. Today's Lundy Gras,
All right.
the Fat Monday before the big Mardi Gras day. So
Okay. Well, you have a great program prepared for us tonight. I'm really looking forward to hearing it because I'm not very familiar with the carnival season and all that goes into Mardi Gras. So really looking forward to what you have to tell us tonight. If you'd like to go ahead and get started.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'm briefly going to talk about Mardi Gras. Really, the full content of my talk tonight is actually about Brigadier General J.J. Alfred A. Mouton, who really was a Cajun general that served here in the Army of Trans-Mississippi. But I'd like to just kind of briefly touch on Mardi Gras since we're in the Mardi Gras season. Just kind of give everybody an idea why why it's such a big deal down here. And from what I'm seeing, it's actually making its way to other points across the United States. I think not only do they see the fun in it, but there's some money to be made when you're hosting Mardi Gras parades and Mardi Gras festivities. So just to preface the history of Mardi Gras in Louisiana, Louisiana was basically New Orleans. Was discovered by Pierre Lemoyne d'Iberville, and he was a French soldier, a ship captain, explorer, and a colonial administrator for the French Empire in North America. He was actually originally from Montreal, Canada, but when his ships and his exploration team entered the mouth of the Mississippi, it was March 2nd in 1699. And actually, that day was actually Lundi Gras, was the same day as today. Of course, Pierre didn't know that the river had already been explored and claimed for France by René Robert Cavelier, the Sieur de la Salle in 1683. But anyway, his party proceeded upstream to the place on the west bank about 60 miles downriver from where New Orleans is today, and they made camp. And this is basically actually in the general area where Fort Jackson and Fort St. Philippe are. So on that on March 3rd on Mardi Gras, that was the day that they set up camp in that area. So in honor of the holiday, Iberville named the spot the Pont du Mardi Gras, which is basically French for Mardi Gras Point. And they called the nearby tributary, which was off of the Mississippi River, they named it Bayou Mardi Gras. Matter of fact, there's a plaque right there on the levee by Fort Jackson down in Plaquemines Parish, Louisiana, that talks about the Bayou Mardi Gras and the expedition by Iberville. So after that, about 3 years later, Iberville went on to found the settlement of Mobile, Alabama, and he claimed that actually as the first capital of French Louisiana. So New Orleans was kind of like an afterthought, and so Mobile was a little bit more important to the French at the time that they named it the French capital in North America. So, but in 1703, about a year after Mobile was founded, the settlers began the Mardi Gras celebration tradition. So if you've ever been to Mobile at Mardi Gras season, it's pretty big there as well, because they kind of do have a claim on, their heritage and their culture at their founding, having, the French that settled there brought their traditions and customs of celebrating Mardi Gras in Mobile. Eventually, in 1720, Biloxi became the capital of Louisiana. And the French customs had already accompanied the colonists who settled there. In 1723, the capital of Louisiana was moved to New Orleans, and that was founded in 1718. The Mardi Gras tradition has expanded to the point that it became strongly associated with the city in popular perception. It's just always a big deal in New Orleans, and was embraced by the residents of New Orleans. And it wasn't just a French or a Catholic tradition, because, really technically the Mardi Gras is the day before Ash Wednesday. So this coming Wednesday is Ash Wednesday, and in the Catholic Church, that's the day that Lent starts, and the 40 days of observance where Catholics, do penance, give up things to prepare for Christ's crucifixion and ultimately his resurrection. So it was a tradition that Mardi Gras was a day to just let everything go, to party, because on Ash Wednesday, it was, supposed to be solemn, giving up things and things like that. So, but Mardi Gras celebrations are part of the basis of the slogan, Laissez les bon temps rouler. And probably if any of y'all have been to the oratory, you've probably heard that a time or two. So that's let the good times roll in French. And also the Big Easy is is a nickname for New Orleans that kind of came about in the Mardi Gras tradition, where a lot of the cares are let loose. So other cities along again, I think I'd mentioned this. Other cities along the Gulf Coast, formerly occupied and owned by the French, from Pensacola, Florida, all the way to Lafayette, Louisiana, which is just about a 40-minute drive, 40-minute drive south of me, here in South Central Louisiana. But all those places, and then again, they're starting to have them in other places. But they're having active Mardi Gras celebrations. Shreveport has a big celebration. Monroe has a big Mardi Gras parade, which, as a matter of fact, they had the big parade that the SCV marched in this past Saturday. So the Mardi Gras tradition is definitely getting out of the boundaries of just New Orleans. As a matter of fact, in the area that I live, this is Cajun country, and it's not the big city Mardi Gras. It's what we call the Career de Mardi Gras, or the country Mardi Gras. And basically, country residents will dress up in just like these wild outfits. And the career is basically they ride horses and they ride from house to house, begging for chicken and sausage and things like that to do a community gumbo. And a lot of times, if you Google a Career de Mardi Gras or the country Mardi Gras in Louisiana, they'll let a chicken loose, and the horse riders will get off their horses and chase the chicken down. So anyway, it's a really unique, it's definitely a different vibe, and it truly is Cajun culture when you're talking about the career de Mardi Gras, or the country Mardi Gras here in Cajun country.
I wondered what Ones and Paul Gramlin were doing on their horseback this afternoon.
Okay. So yeah, that's definitely something unique to my part of Louisiana. And like I said, just so you have an idea, I'm approximately 3 hours west of New Orleans. So anyway, but that's just a little bit of history. Like I said, you can see my wife likes to decorate the house at Mardi Gras, so I incorporated the flag into it there for my talk tonight. And
I've been getting a lot of comment in the chat about your flag. So a lot of people
yeah. So yeah, it's got the Mardi Gras colors: the purple, the green, and the gold or the yellow. So yeah, those are the official Mardi Gras colors.
What do those represent?
You know what? That's one thing that is not. I'd have to Google it to find. I used to know it, but I hadn't looked at that in a while. So I think the purple's royalty, the green and the yellow, I forget what it is. So if any of my Louisiana brothers know that, maybe put it in the comments there. That'd be great.
Chat, see if anybody can answer that for us. But,
okay.
But yeah, that was interesting, Charles. Well, thanks for that background of Mardi Gras.
Well, no problem. But as I mentioned, I wanted to really talk about General Mouton.
Right.
Matter of fact, I helped reactivate the Sons of Confederate Veterans in the town of Opelousas, which is about 15 minutes from my house, back in the early 2000s. And we took an old SCV camp number, but we named our camp. We decided to name the camp after General Mouton because he was originally from Opelousas, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in my talk. But he's what they call it. He goes by several different nicknames, but one is the gallant Mouton, the brave Acadian general, and and truly his heritage is Cajun or Acadian. So basically what I'd like to do tonight and share, because I'm, like I said, this is definitely something, unless you're from Louisiana and even Lafayette, this isn't something that, unless you, are actively seeking out information about the Acadians and then, ultimately General Mouton, this stuff isn't really, known by very many people outside the area. And sadly, probably there's a lot of people that live here that don't really even know this as well. So I'd like to just talk about the history of how the Cajuns got to Louisiana.
Sure.
So I'm going to start with that. And this basically starts in the year 1710. At the conclusion of Queen Anne's War, the British took control of French holdings in what is now Canada, including Acadie, or Acadia. So it's that portion in northeastern Canada where Nova Scotia is, and it goes by, French is Acadie and Acadia in English. Because of the importance of that particular area, England sought to establish a strong colony, and to do that, it wanted to obliterate all vestiges of French rule. It said that was a French colony. Almost all of Canada was under French control, and so when the British wanted to establish their own colony there, and to do that, it had to basically get rid of anything French. So after the English took over Acadie, it was renamed Nova Scotia, and the British wanted to make its new loyal subject. The French Acadians that were there, that had been there, established their lives there, they were really not happy, for obvious reasons, to be under English rule. And they clung stubbornly to their way of life and to each other, resulting in mutual distrust and hostility between them and their British overlords. During the French and Indian War, the British governor sought to force all the Acadians, all the French subjects, to swear an oath of allegiance Yeah, we know a little bit about that, don't we? To the British Crown, which up to that time they had avoided doing by just some kind of just give and take a little bit between the British administrator there. But when they refused, Le Grand Dérangement began. That's French for the great inconvenience. And that was that's what the French termed what would become their expulsion from Nova Scotia. For the Acadians, the big inconvenience meant not only expulsion from the land that they had grown to love, but also an ethnic experience of traumatic proportions. Families were split up. They were loaded on boats like cattle. Conservative estimates conclude that at least 6,000 Acadians were expelled from Nova Scotia, while thousands more actually escaped to the Canadian mainland. So when the 6,000 were expelled, a lot of them were put on ships, and they were basically shipped off to the 13 colonies. Many of them the 13 original colonies, and many of them were in search of a home, and they were really, determined to settle in an area that where French was spoken, where they would, still have some kind of connection to their history and their heritage and their culture. Also, where they could live their Catholic faith and live under French rule. The choices to those that were expelled were either go back to the motherland, to France, the Canadian interior, which I had said, several did, or the French West Indies, and then you had Louisiana. The Acadians chose Louisiana. Some 1,500 Acadians and their descendants accepted transport to Louisiana. It was a difficult and long trek. There were stops along the way, and some ended up getting off. So you can still find some of the Acadian names in Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, and the Carolinas as well. But several of them did end up making it to Louisiana. And by the time they did get to Louisiana, the Treaty of Paris in 1763 had already been signed. And little did they know that Louisiana was now, at that time, under Spanish rule. So they were a little bit miffed to find, well, we thought we were coming to at least a French colony, and then find out it had changed hands to the Spanish. But in a funny way, it really ended up working out better for them. Spain was very accommodating to the French exiles, offering them many generous land grants, because Spain, the governors were aware of how hardworking the Acadians were known to be. And hey, how else to have a prosperous colony than have hardworking citizens to make that colony that way for you. So basically, when the French arrived here in Louisiana, they named it Nouvelle Acadie, or Acadiana, kind of just like a little bit of a split of Acadia and Louisiana. And so the region that I live in, this region here that I talked about, the country Mardi Gras and everything, is known as Acadiana. And also subsequently, an Acadian is what they were known as. The term eventually was kind of just shortened to a slang, and that's where the term Cajun came from. So you can kind of Acadian, Cajun. So Cajun is a derivative or a shortened version of Acadian. So just a little bit, just to give you an idea where, how Cajuns. So basically anybody who's descended from someone who came to Louisiana from Nova Scotia during the Le Grand Dérangement is known as a Cajun.
Okay.
So now there was a man, young Jean Mouton, And he was one of the first Acadians to arrive here in Louisiana. And surprisingly, with most of his family, because there were some issues, families getting split up during the trip from Nova Scotia to Louisiana. Some family members dying, but Jean Mouton's family pretty much arrived here in South Louisiana intact. Now, they arrived in New Orleans in 1758. He was still nearly a boy, but even as a child, he somehow applied for a land grant and received a tract of land along Bayou Vermilion in present-day Lafayette. So, said Lafayette is the major city, basically called the hub city in Southwest Louisiana. And Bayou Vermilion, or Vermilion Bayou, is the main bayou that runs through the city down to the Gulf of Mexico. So young Jean Mouton, after he got his land grant, and he eventually became one of the wealthiest men in the region. He eventually married, and among their many children, Alexandre Mouton was born in 1804. Now, I think we got a picture. There he is. That's Alexander Mouton. That's Jean's son. Alexander eventually became a planter and waded into politics, becoming the first Democrat governor of the state of Louisiana in 1842. Mouton's political career peaked at his election as president of the Louisiana Secession Convention in 1861, a role that would prove prophetic to the South, to the Acadians, and to his eldest son, which leads us to the man of the hour. Although Alexander and his wife Celestine Rousseau were from Vermilionville, and I called the city Lafayette at first. Actually, Lafayette was originally known as Vermilionville, and it said Bayou Vermilion, and they named the city Vermilion by the waterway. Ultimately, though, the city was changed to Lafayette, and that was actually done to honor the Marquis de Lafayette from the American Revolution. So if you hear me talk about Vermilionville or Lafayette, I'm talking about the same city. But they lived, and their plantation was in Vermilionville, but Alfred was actually born in Opelousas, and again, hence the reason we named the camp to honor him. But the story was his mother, Celestine Rousseau, was originally from Opelousas, and during the winter they were visiting her family in Opelousas. And being February, and he was born on February 18th, 1829. Being February, it was there's some nasty winter weather, or so oral history says in the Mouton family, that prohibited them from getting back to the plantation to give birth. So by happenstance, he was born in the city of in the town of Opelousas at the time. So we consider him a true son and hero from Opelousas, although he lived most of his life in Vermilionville. Hey, what's going on? Look who's here.
Well, I was going to try. I just left a camp meeting talking about SCV CHAT. Just wanted to poke my head in, make sure that Adam hadn't run the show off the rails. And I wanted to thank Adam really quickly for hosting tonight. I know it was even the best laid plans will sometimes, turn to mess after the first shots are fired. But I want to thank you for being on. Tell everybody that really miss them, but I'll try to be on Thursday. And thank you, Charles, for being on. And that's all I really wanted, to make sure everything was going good.
Okay, well, good to see you.
He was
all right, I'll let y'all later.
He was just wanting people to know that he's Connor Bond and I'm Adam Southern. Don't get us confused.
Exactly. All right, guys. Have a great one.
All right, you too now. All right. So, again, like I said, Mouton was born February 18th, 1829 in Opelousas. And as a second-generation American of Acadian heritage, he was named after his father and both grandfathers. Actually, his full name, usually everybody kind of, goes General Alfred Mouton, but his name was actually Jean-Jacques Alfred Alexander Mouton. So, like I said, full name, honoring his ancestors and things like that. But like I said, most everybody, he went by Alfred. But
That'd be a mouthful.
That's right. Yeah, try to spit it out. Heck, I was even kind of nervous there for a second. I said, I'm going to screw this one up. But anyway, excuse me. So in 1837, Alfred's mother passed away, and his father, Alexander, remarried. He was actually a senator in Washington City at the time for the state of Louisiana, and he married Anne Emma Gardner, who was from a prominent Washington family in 1842. And interestingly enough, she was the sister of General Gardner of Port Hudson fame. So Alfred, they were brothers-in-law, Alfred Mouton and General Gardner. So, which was an interesting connection. Now, the Acadians, or the Cajuns, played an important role in the economic, political, and even the military life in antebellum Louisiana. They were always quick to volunteer for military duty. Matter of fact, many Acadians were members of local militias, and those local militias, including the Opelousas militia, which one of my great-grandfathers was a member of, they actually rallied to help General Galvez at the Battle of Baton Rouge in 1779. And they ultimately again went to New Orleans to help Jackson during the War of 1812. In 1846, so it wasn't unusual now that Mouton was, kind of maybe leaning toward military life as well. But in 1846, his father secured for him an appointment at West Point. He saw many promotions as a cadet and excelled in the humanities, but he wasn't so good at the math and sciences. Now, needless to say, French was probably one of his best classes. So he graduated from West Point on June 18th, 1850, number 38 out of 44. Throughout his tenure at West Point, he never really had a very high ranking, but he was a good student. He was ultimately commissioned as a second lieutenant in the 7th Infantry, and of course, they were given a break from basically, I think it was July or June to September after graduation, before they had to report to their duty station. But he ultimately, and because there was no war going on or anything like that, nothing actively going on, they were allowed to resign their commission if they so chose before even reporting for duty. And that's exactly what Mouton did. He resigned his commission in September of 1850, and he chose to become a planner like his father. He ultimately got into also railroad work. He was on a board for a railroad that ran from New Orleans to basically Brasher City or Morgan City, southeast of Lafayette. And but then he ultimately got out of that to run his own plantation. In February 1854, he married his wife, Philomene Mouton, who was actually his second cousin, and they had 5 children. Now, he ultimately did, his West Point and military training actually did come in handy because in 1855, the state of Louisiana started reorganizing its militia, its state militia forces. And he was promoted or appointed as a brigadier general of the state militia. It served as an opportunity to put his military training to use and was really a way to put him on the stage to allow high state officials to see and recognize his leadership abilities. Now, we kind of wanted to touch on something interesting, because this was something that, and ultimately I'm going to talk about how the statue of General Mouton in Lafayette was removed last year. But this was one of the arguments that people had when they were talking negatively about Mouton. And it's basically, they said he ran vigilante committees and needlessly tortured other Cajuns and blacks, and just was basically a criminal. And so, but what was happening is, and like I said, parts of Southwest Louisiana were still, they were still prairie, and ultimately, in the mid 1850s, they saw a rise in criminal gang activities like cattle rustling, large scale robberies, and things like that. Matter of fact, I'm gonna, part of the source for my talk is this book here, The Acadian General Alfred Mouton and the Civil War. So there was something that I wanted to refer to. Let's see. Yeah. So for Alfred Mouton, the years 1857 and 1858 were pleasant and relatively uneventful. He supervised the operation of a plantation, looking after his growing family, and apprehensively noted the mounting tide of sectionalism in the United States. But it was to be events on the local scene that would first disturb the tranquility of the countryside. In about 1856, a small gang of outlaws began operating in Acadiana, their activities consisting at first of sporadic petty thievery, but then getting up to larger crimes, accompanied by an occasional murders that became more and more frequent. The outlaw gang was well organized, apparently directed by a secret central committee which planned and coordinated its criminal activities. Furthermore, on the few occasions some of these brigands were apprehended, prosecution was virtually impossible because the outlaws possessed influential contacts within the local legal community. Attorneys, certainly not the more reputable members of the local bar, received large retainers from the outlaw band and usually obtained acquittals for their clients, often by extra legal means. Jury tampering became a common occurrence. This mockery of justice and the impossibility of securing convictions convinced some citizens that the only solution to this problem was to take justice into their own hands. Alfred Mouton was one of these citizens. Public opinion was divided on the issue. The majority of Acadians, including young Mouton, felt justified ignoring the established avenues of legal recourse. They maintained that extra-legal action is justified on the broad and general principle that all authority emanates from the people, and that when all established means of enforcing the law of the state and protecting the lives and property of the citizens fail, then authority evolves upon the people to see that justice is administered. So to that end, in 1857, the activities increased, while the outlaws increased to the point that debate was forsaken for direct action. So a local citizen established the Comites de Vigilance, or the Vigilance Committee. And ultimately, General Mouton, or Alfred Mouton, became involved as a drill master for the Lafayette Parish Committee. Now, for those who don't know, Louisiana doesn't have counties; it has parishes. And Lafayette Parish was the parish that was where the city of Lafayette or Vermilionville was. Now, the Louisiana governor at the time didn't agree with this. With these committees, so he called for the disbanding of the committees. But as the criminal activity increased, the committees became more popular among the law-abiding citizens, as well as the local press. The criminal gang was bolstered by the governor's call for disbanding. So basically they felt like, man, we can do anything. We've got basically the governor saying that those that are trying to oppose us are, no good and trying to get rid of them. So we can just keep doing what we're doing. So with that said, they planned an all-out war basically to loot and burn Vermilionville. They started stockpiling weapons and things like that to get ready. And on September 3rd, 1859, the committees under the leadership of Commandant Mouton dealt a severe blow to the criminal gang surrounding them at their headquarters and rounding them up. They released some, they lashed others, and exiled the leaders out of the area. Once the years of criminal activities by the outlaws ended, the committees were disbanded. So they served their purpose, and ultimately peace and not all the lawlessness and craziness was going on. So basically about that time, 1859, with the committees disbanded, calm was reigned in Acadiana up until 1861. So I think, producer, do we have maybe a commercial lined up, or I think this would be a good time to get a little break in?
Yeah, good.
Okay.
It started about 3 years ago. A controversy began with the political correct movement that was taking place in Memphis, and force became a lightning rod.
They created a nonprofit group, a puppet organization, went in there in the middle of the night and removed the statue in violation of a number of laws.
Even if the statue got put back up, it wouldn't last a week. Why don't we move on?
There's no one alive today that could tell us where General Forrest and Mrs. Forrest were buried.
As we were digging away the dirt from in front of the statue, we discovered a flower cradle, and it said N.B. Forrest, 1877. We uncovered both the vaults, and they were side by side.
So can you raise it just a little bit more so we can get the scrap? That's good. A little bit more.
Recognizing the enormity of the history that's involved with this, I wanted to make sure that it was done right.
This is one of those things that you can't fail on. You can't just halfway do this. You have to be invested. You have to go with it with all your heart and soul.
We're here to remember a hero, not just of the South, but an American warrior.
The line is drawn now. This is not just an attack on Confederate or Southern history. It's an attack on American history.
Well, I can't wait to see that.
What's that?
I said, I can't wait to see the rest of that.
Yeah, that's wow. What a great trailer.
Yeah. Woo, gives me chill bumps just thinking about it. Wow. Yes,
indeed. All right. So we're going to continue my talk about the Cajun general, the gallant Mouton. So we basically left off where after the criminal gangs were run off by the vigilance committees of the area, there was some peace and quiet in Acadiana up until 1861. From the moment war became a certainty, Alfred Mouton became the Acadians' natural leader. He was the only West Point graduate in all of Acadiana. During the summer of 1861, he raised Home Guard units and then turned his attention to raising military units for Confederate service. He ultimately led his volunteers to Camp Moore and was officially enrolled in the Confederate Army on October 5th, 1861. Now, of course, I'm not going to spend time covering the entire war, but I'm just going to touch on a few bullet points about some of the things that he did during the war, and then we'll talk about the great climax of his career and his life. He was elected colonel of the 18th Louisiana when it was formed in regiment at Camp Moore. The regiment ultimately became fully augmented at Camp Benjamin in New Orleans in December of 1861 and was brigaded with the 16th, 17th, the 19th, and the 20th Louisiana Infantry Regiments and placed under the command of Brigadier General Daniel Ruggles. They ultimately shipped off to the city of Corinth in northern Mississippi in February 1862. So once they were in Corinth, they were preparing to go to Shiloh, and this would have been the speech while the men were standing at arms as they prepared to go. This would have been the message that the men of the Louisiana Brigade and the 18th Louisiana and Colonel Mouton would have heard from General Albert Sidney Johnston. Soldiers of the Army of the Mississippi, I have put you in motion to offer battle to the invaders of your country. With the resolution and discipline and valor becoming men fighting as you are for all worth living or dying for, you can but march to a decisive victory over the agrarian mercenaries sent to subjugate you and to despoil you of your liberties, your property, and your honor. Remember the precious stake involved. Remember the dependence of your mothers, your wives, your sisters, and your children on the result. Remember the fair, broad, abounding land and the happy homes that would be desolated by your defeat. The eyes and hopes of 8 millions of people rest upon you. You are expected to show yourselves worthy of your lineage, worthy of the women of the South, whose noble devotion in this war has never been exceeded in any time. With such incentives to brave deeds and with the trust that God is with us, your generals will lead you confidently to the combat, assured of success. Quite moving, right?
What a speech.
So he was. So he led the 18th Louisiana in hot action on the first day of the Battle of Shiloh. Matter of fact, he had his horse Attakapaw, which is actually another region of Acadiana. Is actually an Indian name, but that's a region kind of to the eastern portion of Acadiana. But he named his horse Attakapaw. It was actually shot out from underneath him. On the second day of the Battle of Shiloh, he was wounded, and the facial resulted in a facial wound that damaged a portion of his left eye. So after the battle, Mouton was sent down to New Orleans to convalesce at the St. Charles Hotel in downtown New Orleans, which had been converted into a hospital. And actually, the St. Charles Hotel still exists to this day. While there at the hotel, he received word that he was promoted on April 17th, 1862, by Jefferson Davis to the rank of brigadier general. At 33, he was one of the youngest general officers of the war. By October 1862, he was returned to active duty. This time it was in his homeland and the Louisiana Theater. Now, he took part in many campaigns from over 62 and 63, including the Bayou Lafourche campaign, the Teche campaign, the Bayou Vermilion battle, the Battle of Buzzards Prairie, and the Battle in Opelousas. Matter of fact, when the Yankees came up through Vermilionville, his father had to flee having been in the president of the secession convention and everything, he was targeted. But so he did end up fleeing, and the Yankees stripped his home. It was called Ile Copal. They stripped his home and also used it as a headquarters. And that was actually Alexander Mouton, Alfred's father. By October to November 1863, Union General Nathaniel Banks gave up his overland expedition in Louisiana to get to Texas, and he pulled troops back south out of Acadiana to focus on another coastal attack on Texas. This would ultimately lead to a reprieve for General Richard Taylor's army, with no major action in Louisiana until the following year. When that engagement would come, Mouton would no longer be defending his native country. In November 1863, he was sent to Northeast Louisiana and placed in command of a newly created 2nd Division of the Army of Trans-Mississippi. Mouton's men held him in great esteem. The winter of 1863 and 64 was especially difficult for the men of his command, especially while in winter quarters in the Ouachita River Valley. And especially a lot of his Cajun troops, there's a big difference between winters in South Louisiana and winters in North Louisiana. So it was a real difficult time for a lot of them. But it was during this time, a special action on the part of General Mouton cemented the bond between him and his men. He'd been constantly requesting supplies for his men, and from the headquarters in Shreveport. And after weeks without receiving those requested supplies, Mouton confiscated a shipment of supplies destined for another theater of the ATM, and he dispersed it among his division. He took full responsibility for what was essentially disobedience and a countermand of a superior officer who was actually the chief commissary of the Army of Trans-Mississippi. Mouton argued of the necessity of the action, and he was ultimately supported by General Kirby Smith and General Richard Taylor, and he was exonerated. So said he made the decision, and it ended up working out well for him and his men. In early March of 64, and I think now that he was a general, I think we've got a picture of Mouton in his Confederate uniform. There we go. And that's a photo there of General Mouton. So handsome devil he was. In early March of 1864, intelligence gathered that General Banks was indeed going to try and take Texas by way of the Red River Valley in Louisiana. During this campaign would be the largest Confederate victory west of the Mississippi, but that victory brought with it the loss of the gallant Mouton. The Red River campaign brought the Yankees from Brasher City, which is now known as Morgan City, up through Acadiana, into Alexandria, into central Louisiana, up to Natchitoches, and ultimately up to the towns of Pleasant Hill and Mansfield in northwest Louisiana. On April 7th, Tom Green, a general from Texas, and his Texas cavalry engaged in obstructing the federal advance. And at that point, General Taylor chose to make a stand against the Yankees at Mansfield. Upon directing his commanders into positions south of the town, Taylor confided in one of his subordinates that he would fight Banks on his chosen field, even if Banks had 1,000,000 men. The engagement started midday on April 8th, when federal cavalry advanced on Confederate skirmishers, only to find skirmishers give way to infantry and cavalry of Mouton's division. Mouton gave the order to troops of his former 18th Louisiana to fire, sending them back. Mouton called on his division for quote unquote 3 cheers for Louisiana, whose sons had let the first blood of the day. It did not take much to get a rouse out of those men. Taylor ultimately chose to go on the offensive and decided a charge was in order. Knowing the importance of seizing the initiative and maintaining momentum, Taylor chose the gallant Mouton to lead a charge. At about 4:15 p.m., Mouton mounted his horse and drew his saber. Louisiana governor and war veteran Henry Watkins Allen had come down to the field from Freeport upon hearing of the impending engagement. He left a vivid account of Mouton's charge. I'd like to read that from the Acadian General. Mouton charged down a hill, over a fence, through a ravine, then up a hill right in the teeth of the guns. The charge lasted 25 minutes. The men were moved forward at double quick, exposed to a terrible fire at all times, especially whilst in the ravine between the woods and the hill upon which the federal batteries were stationed. The exposure to grape and canister was dreadful. Many Confederates fell here. The men were nearly breathless when they struggled up the ravine. Mouton commanded them to throw themselves prostrate a moment to recover breath. Then they sprang up and rushed to the attack. Mouton was always in the front. The guns were taken after a desperate struggle. The Federals broke and fled. Mouton turned, lifting his hand to stay the firing of the Confederates upon this group of prisoners. As he did so, 5 of the Federals stooped down, picked up their guns, aimed them at the generous Confederate, and in a moment 5 balls pierced the noble, magnanimous breast. Mouton dropped from his saddle dead without a word or a sigh. The Confederates who witnessed this cowardly deed gave a yell of indignation, and before their officers could check them, the 35 Federals lay dead around Mouton. With the death of Mouton, General and Prince Camille de Polignac, or as they like to call him, Polecat, assumed command of the 2nd Division. He pressed the men forward who especially wanted to avenge their beloved general's death. The Union line broke and troops retreated in haste from the field. It should be noted that the cunning of Taylor and the courage of Mouton were key factors in crushing the Union advance in the Red River Valley. 1,000 casualties and the death of Mouton was a very high price for the victory. Of Mouton's death, Taylor later wrote, "Above all, the death of gallant Mouton affected me. He had joined me soon after I reached Western Louisiana and had ever proven faithful to duty. Modest, unselfish, and patriotic, he showed best in action, always leading his men. Troops and officers alike in the Army, upon hearing news of the tragic death, took it very hard. Wrote one Texan, yeah, sorry, I lost my spot here. Yep. Wrote one Texan, to see strong-hearted men thus give way to their feelings, it demonstrated the devotion felt for their gallant chieftain and showed how deeply he was enshrined in these brave souls. Also, the brigade commissary Felix Pochet wrote, "It is there that our well-loved and faultlessly brave general fell dead. General Mouton, whose loss will be keenly felt by the Confederate Army." Mouton was buried where he fell. In 1867, his body was exhumed and returned to Vermilionville, buried in the cemetery of St. John's Cathedral. That land from which was donated to the city by the Mouton family. Well, before that, they wasn't just donated for it wasn't just donated for his burial or anything. They had donated all the church and cemetery land. And yeah, there's a picture. That's currently the grave of General Mouton in St. John's Cemetery. And the obelisk was erected by the United Daughters of the Confederacy. I believe it was in the early 2000s. Yeah. And actually, the quote from General Taylor about Mouton is engraved on the side right there. So, but yeah, He was reinterred in St. John Cemetery on April 24th, 1867. Vermilionville came out to honor its fallen hero. They said all public places and stores were closed and businesses suspended in the town from the moment the body reached the limits of the town to the moment the ceremony closed. Amid a tribute of universal respect paid to the worthy dead by the old and young, rich and poor, the body was taken to the cemetery and buried in the family plot, embalmed with the wreaths and flowers of nature, the tears of his comrades, and memories of his own historic deeds. Now, the statue of General Mouton was erected by the United Daughters of the Confederacy in 1922, there in front of the what was then the City Hall of Lafayette. I think we have there it is. That's where Mouton was originally. Yeah, there's another view of it. And then sadly, in the wake of all the statue removals, the statue was removed basically by force from the city of Lafayette, and it was re-erected on the grounds of Camp Moore in November of 2021, which is actually fitting because, again, as I had referred back the beginning of his Confederate career, Camp Moore was where he led his volunteers and where they were mustered in the Confederate service. I think we've got some pictures of its new location. There we go. So that's where the statue stands now. So, but that's and this picture here is the monument to Mouton on the field at actually the battlefield in Mansfield. It's the Mansfield State Historic Site. And that's to his memory there. That's the Mouton Camp flag leaning up against it. That picture comes from when we had done a memorial service for him there. But that kind of wraps up my program for tonight.
That's Charles. Are there any questions in the chat for Charles Lauret about this? Have the producer, if there are, just go ahead and put those up on the screen for us. And while we're waiting, Charles, I understand you're running for office this year.
Yeah. After a 2-year hiatus, I'm looking to get back on the General Executive Council and serve the Confederation as the Army of Trans-Mississippi Councilman. So I'm looking forward to having the opportunity to run and asking for your vote. Those of you that can vote in the ATM, hope to see you there in Georgia in July when we have our national elections. So looking forward to getting back active again. Like I said, I've been serving as camp adjutant and Louisiana Division Chief of Staff, but definitely miss serving on the national level. So I saw this as an opportunity to get back on the national level and put my experience to use. So,
all right. Well, good luck to you on that. And we did have an answer to Mama Gremlin said that the green stands for faith, gold stands for power, and purple stands for justice. Those are the
okay.
Green, gold, and purple.
Thank you, Linda.
Yeah. So thank you, Mama Gremlin, for telling us what those mean. So, if there are any questions popping up in the chat, everybody's saying great job, and I agree with them, Charles. That's a lot of great information. I learned a lot tonight, so I appreciate the invitation.
Well, I appreciate the invitation to come back on the chat and talk to y'all. And like I said, I'm glad to see y'all enjoyed the presentation. Like I said, it's definitely General Mouton is not one of the very well known, but he definitely worthy of our admiration and respect for giving his life in battle.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that a lot of the Western theater is overlooked and overshadowed by what happened in the East, but the fighting in the West was just as fierce and if not worse than what took place in the East. And Bhutan's definitely a hero and somebody we need to preserve his history and his story as best we can.
Yes, indeed. Hi, Ron. But thanks for everybody for watching. I appreciate it. Great to be here with y'all.
Good.
Thank you, Josh.
We're going to sign off tonight. Again, appreciate you watching SCV Chat, and be sure to share this. This grows only through being shared. So share the word about SCV Chat. Share the chat on your page or on your camp page, personal page, whatever you can do to get it out there. And watch us on YouTube too. Thanks for watching, y'all.
Happy Mardi Gras, everybody.